What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Bait Tank Fishing Podcast. This is a video podcast talking about everything fishing. I'm here to tell you two things. One, you've been lied to your whole life. Fish is not as healthy as you think it is, or you've been told. And I'm going to tell you guys why. We're going to talk about what is in the fish that is bad. We're going to talk about how to avoid it. And we're going to talk about a way to clean fish to make it so you're not as exposed to this or to these toxins. And so we want it to be as safe as possible. Joining me as usual, I have my normal co-hosts. I got Zach and Sam, and we also have my special guest Joe from down in Texas. Welcome in, Joe. Glad you're here. Glad you guys can make it. So yeah, Joe, why don't you go and tell us a little bit about yourself, since you haven't ever been out here before. Tell people what you're about, what you like, what kind of fish you like to do, what your focus is.
I mean, I enjoy all types of fishing, but I'd say my focus is predominantly saltwater. Due to the pollution out here in Texas, we don't have a whole lot of good freshwater fishing if you enjoy eating fish. But I grew up in South Florida fishing there. I've probably been fishing in Texas for about 15 years now. And then I make it out to Panama City in the summer and the fall to fish out there as well.
All right. Well, so that's Joe. Like I said, primarily saltwater fishing. Glad he could be here tonight to talk to us about toxins in fish, especially with the saltwater point of view. Obviously, Zach likes to go shark fishing, so he has some opinions on that as well. But for the most part, the normal three of us are predominantly freshwater fishermen. So it'd be nice to have that point of view as well. Zach, Sam, how are you guys? How's your week going? Are you guys glad to be back?
Always happy to do that.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Sam actually had I had a hiccup today. We're glad he's here. He was possibly going to miss tonight. So yeah, I'm glad he's feeling well enough to be on the show this evening.
So if I seem out of it, kind of like a zombie,
Because
that's
you are.
why I feel like it right now. I almost had a heart attack today, but all is good.
Well, like I said, glad you're here. Glad it wasn't a heart attack. Glad it was something obviously still serious enough to put you in the hospital, but glad it's not something that's so serious you're still in there.
Yeah, I could have spent the night there too, but I wanted to be here with you guys.
We all appreciate that very much. So, like I said, pollutants in fish. You guys, if you've been fishing for any length of time, depending on what river system or lake system you fish, predominantly I'm talking about the Mississippi River, Tennessee River, Ohio River, some of the bigger ones, even the Potomac. These all have various amounts of advisory warning signs about eating certain species of fish because of the pollutants in the water. In particular, the Tennessee River is where I live on and fish. It's where Zach lives on and fish. Almost every single dam down here has a warning about not eating the catfish because of pollutants.
I won't eat any fish from a certain section of water by all the nuclear plant, we got 3M plants all the way down the river here. I won't eat anything from around that area.
Well, sure. You hear the rumors, right? A lot of the old timers talk about, if you start eating that, you're going to grow a third arm, you're going to glow in the dark, all kinds of crazy stuff.
3M got in trouble down here for dumping pollutants in the river.
Well, and so you hear about that everywhere, right? That's not going to be just in the river. That's going to be anywhere across the country. If you have a company that's dumping stuff they shouldn't be dumping in the river, then obviously they should get in trouble for it, right?
They're in a lawsuit right now over it. They got busted last year.
I got you.
So I'll be honest. I haven't seen any signs up here. No major lawsuits. Like everything, the biggest problem that we have up here is people bottling water and sending it to other places, which brings the water levels up. That's the only except for the whole Flint and Detroit River catching a fire. I'm talking like northern Michigan where I'm at. There's no signs. So when we were talking about this, I was like, are you talking like what parts of the fish, like physical parts of the fish? Like, what are you talking about? Because I know nothing. I was so confused. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And then you're like, there's signs on the river. I'm like, where? because at the time I was at like on a lake, so I was like actually like turning around, like,
Where are these
no,
signs?
I don't see anything.
Well, sorry. Yes, the pollutants in the waters. What they're talking
It's a
about.
normal thing for us, so we don't
Yes,
think about it being.
but literally we see it nonstop down here.
That makes
It's
sense, but I've never seen anything, so I'm like, man, that sucks. Like that's all I can say. Like, sucks to be you guys.
sure,
Sorry.
but no need. Why are you sorry, man? It is what it is. But there's a reason for these spills. Like the most recent one that I can think of is on the Ohio River when that train derailed in the river. And I can't remember what the cause of the train derailing was, but I know that they're still cleaning up that mess. They're still dealing with the fish kill from that in certain spots. And that's probably the most recent one. But the biggest one, at least for the Tennessee River, was labeled as the biggest. What was the wording they used? The worst coal
Largest
ash disaster.
industrial disaster.
Largest industrial disaster in United States history on December 22nd of 2008. The coal ash spill at the Tennessee Valley Authority's Kingston Fossil Plant in Roane County, Tennessee. It dumped 1.1 billion U.S. gallons of coal ash slurry into the river. And Joe looked it up. What was that list of chemicals that was in that coal ash?
It's like cadmium, chromium, mercury, selenium. I mean, probably 5 or 6 other ones. All
Lead,
the bad
mercury,
ones.
yeah, all the
and that's what.
Cyanide.
And that's what we use at work for our fly ash for the concrete.
Yeah,
that's what we use for fly ash.
Right. So I mean, it's something.
So I know that stuff ain't no good. That'll make you sick quick too.
Well, right. So then that's what it boils down to, is that being in the river, that's polluting the fish, polluting the water, I should say, which inevitably pollutes the fish, and then eventually trickles down the system through the food chain to us, or wherever the commercial fishery people take their fish to. It trickles down eventually. But the 3 biggest ones in all of it, the 3 that are labeled as the worst, the most problematic, I should say, are going to be mercury, which you hear about all the time in tuna. That's why they tell you you're only supposed to eat tuna once or twice a week because the amount of mercury in it. PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls, if I even pronounced that right, which those are man-made chemicals that were used in electrical equipment and industrial processes. They are banned in many countries, but they do persist in the environment and accumulate in fatty tissues of fish, like salmon and catfish, through contaminated waterways. And then there's microplastics, which microplastics are literally just like all the plastic bottles and plastic pollution we've put in the river systems over time, the trash. Literally when that starts breaking down, you start seeing that show up in all of this, and it's crazy, that it is that serious.
So about the microplastics and stuff like that, they have done like urine samples on humans, and we all have microplastics inside of us, like at all time. Like, they're actually wondering about future birth defects, because yeah, if it's in the urinary tract system, it's everywhere. So that's a thing right now. Like, it's just in our water. So if we drink the water, it's in us.
Sure.
Oh,
And
and the Ohio train, a failed roller bearing overheated. So whatever that is.
probably roller bearing in the wheel, if I had to guess.
Well,
Which
yeah,
would
but
yeah,
a wheel fell off the train.
and off into the river it
If
went.
Yeah. Kerplunk.
But yeah, so how does the pollutants get into the fish? That's the big question here, right? Why is it all of a sudden? It's because the fish don't really. I mean, yes, they quote unquote drink the water when they breathe, right? Because they're trying to get the oxygen through the water, but that's not how they absorb it. They probably absorb a little bit through. I'm not going to say that they don't at all. I guess I probably shouldn't say that, as I'm not a biologist. But the biggest thing is through bioaccumulation, which the nitty gritty of that is there's plankton. They eat the garbage. Bait fish eat the plankton. Bigger fish eat the bait fish, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of these species, they say, hey, be careful how much you eat. literally is going to be because of two things: either their size or their age. Whether they've been marinating in this for 50 years or 100 years or 150 years, depending on the species, or by how much they eat predation wise. Obviously, if you have a bigger fish that eats primarily grass or weeds or whatnot, they're probably going to have a little bit less. If you have something that doesn't have a very long lifespan, they only eat so much. They're not going to be as exposed. But then you have these big fish. Joe can add to this part in a minute. So, these saltwater species, you got grouper, tuna, swordfish, all these things that do nothing but eat bait fish all day. Those are the species that have the most potent, I guess, sources of these contaminants. You want to elaborate on that a little bit, Joe?
Yeah, I guess essentially they have slower metabolisms and they live for a lot longer. So they just digest more fish. The other thing is a lot of those fish, if we're talking about the bigger billfish, tunas, even the food chain down to, let's say, kingfish, they feed on a lot of mackerel and a lot of fish that are high in mercury to begin with. So it's just compounded through that.
Sure. One of the examples I was reading when I was doing a little more research for this episode, one of the research things I was showing, or I'm sorry, one of the research things I read into, guy was talking about how it not only does it compound based on how much they eat, but like you said, if they're eating these other fish that are have higher accumulations anyway, or are older to start with, if you have one of the ones they talk about was an orange pogey. No, it was orange something. That apparently
orange pogey is one of the most polluted.
Yeah, they live to be like 150 years old. So yeah, you have something that could be 150 years old and been marinating in this and eating and whatnot, and then somebody bigger eats it. Well, then they just ate 150 years worth of mercury, and now it's potentially going to be in them, right? Because I don't know I don't know absorption rates. I mean, so that's the other key here, right? With the slower metabolism, it takes longer to digest the food. Well, then they probably are going to absorb more because it has more time through their system, right? Whereas something that has
the interesting thing about that fish also is it's the most overfished fish in the world, the orange pogey.
That was exactly what that guy said too. So I saw that and I heard that and I was like, wow, okay, so we're just literally somewhat poisoning ourselves unintentionally because that's just the way the system is right now, right? It's absolutely nuts. But the idea
conspiracy theories abound.
Always put on your tinfoil hats, ladies and gentlemen, tinfoil hats. But the biggest thing to remember or consider when it comes to this stuff, I would say, is the simple fact that just being aware of it can make a huge difference. I know here in Tennessee, a lot of the guys that eat catfish, they don't like cleaning 10 or 12 little ones. They'd rather keep one big one. Well, that one big one's been marinating in this stuff and eating a ton of bait fish for forever. How much pollutants are they exposing themselves to? I know TVA did an analysis, and I don't have any of those numbers because I should have pulled those up. But with this being a whole entire states thing, I didn't necessarily want to pull up just one single state thing. But the numbers of the PCBs and there was another thing too, another that's not even on my list, that triglycerides or something that was really high in it too. And same thing, it was always the bigger fish or the ones that were predominantly predatory fish that seemed to always be higher in that study as well.
And you have to watch what so the information can be a little skewed because they'll say that catfish is one of the least polluted when it comes to mercury and other toxins, but that's because they take into account the farm raised populations in their calculations.
That does not surprise me.
Where obviously which in the farm raised populations, you just have a whole different set of toxins that, aren't measured for in, let's say, natural bodies of water because they come from the feed that's used and then the chemicals that are used to keep the fish healthy. So it's some politicking involved, I guess.
Well, unfortunately, there's some of that and everything, right? But it's
Don't
just crazy.
With those Tennessee boys catfish,
Yeah, there's a reason I don't eat catfish.
I personally do eat catfish,
Yeah.
but like I said, I'm gonna take those, a couple of the ones that only weigh 2 or 3 pounds. That blue catfish especially, they grow so fast. The ones, and I don't know the exact right. I'm just guessing here, but as fast as they grow overall, I mean, I think they said it's like 6 years to get a 30 pounder. Okay, well, it takes 6 months to be a 10 pounder. If you want to break it down just that simple math, I'm sure it's not quite right. I'm sure it's exponential, but uh if I take one that's 5 pounds or less, it's probably not that old. I'd say maybe a year or two at max of a blue catfish. Now, a channel catfish at that same size, maybe it takes twice as long, right? So I tend to keep smaller channel cats and a little bit bigger blue cats, just because of the fact I know the growth ratio is different, right? But
I don't keep blues or flatheads. I only keep channels.
and that's to each their own on that, right? I
Yeah.
know another. There's a whole other crowd of people that say they won't touch a channel cat because they eat the garbage off the bottom. They're opportunistic and eat anything. You can feed them a sock and they'll eat it, but that that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the healthiest of the three either, right? So and you have to establish his opinion for yourself. Just as like you said, you won't do that. You only eat channels. You won't eat the blues and flatheads. Whereas me, I'd much prefer to eat the blues over anything. I've never ate a flathead, to be honest with you. I've caught so few, I just let them all go. But and the one I caught was the first one I caught was smaller than this water bottle. The second one I caught was 24 pounds. So I mean, I went from one extreme to the other. One that was going to be so small it was going to be like a nugget and not even worth cleaning, and then one that was so big that I know was old enough I didn't.
24-pound channel?
No, flathead.
Oh,
I caught
well, I caught that 50. I caught that 57 pounder last year, and I think the biggest channel I've ever caught was 22.
I think the biggest channel I ever caught might have been like 16, which I mean, it's still a good channel cat. They say a 20 is a record class fish. So I'm not quite there yet, but still, I mean, usually for me, if I keep channels, they're like 1 or 2 pounds, maybe 3. Blue cat, so you try to stay under 5. Occasionally, I might take a bigger one if I'm having a slow day and I want something. But like I said, I've never ate a flathead.
I've heard they're good.
I've heard they're good too. I've heard they're actually the best tasting of the 3, but I don't really know, and have no way to prove that either. So,
I mean, with the way I fish, I don't really catch very many small ones anymore.
I mean, that's fair.
You don't catch any or big ones either.
Oof.
Yeah,
Shots
here
fired.
lately, no, I have not.
Sorry, I just want to let you guys know I was still here. I haven't said anything since we started.
It's all good. I haven't heard you snoring yet, so the meds haven't fully kicked in yet.
Oh no, they are, dude. Like I can hear colors.
That's interesting prospect.
I am really, really tired, so I think I'm gonna call it early, guys. I'm sorry.
How dare you? But no, I'm just kidding. We appreciate you coming in, man. Do get the feeling better. We'll definitely catch Sam on the next episode. Guys, say goodnight to Sam. We'll catch him next time.
Later, brother. Have a good one.
Later, man.
All right. But like I said, we've talked about the biggest industrial accident that polluted the river, or a river in the United States history, which is the Kingston plant coal ash spill. What happened there was a dike that was holding the sludge broke, which dumped it all into the river, which caused all these signs to get put up saying, hey, don't eat the catfish, especially if you're pregnant, or if you do, try to limit yourself to, I think it's 1 serving a month, which they don't even specify. I will say one thing they don't specify what a serving is. And it's very misleading because anybody who does any kind of food, anything, that white wedding cake, sheet cake that everybody gets for weddings, the cheap one, you're a 1 inch, I think it's a 1 inch by 1 inch piece is considered a serving. I don't know about you. I'm not eating a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of cake and being satisfied. All right. So what's the real definition of a serving? I feel like it would do better if they definitely put that on the sign as well, or at least did a publication and announced it so people would know. Zach, Joe, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Is a 1 inch by 1 inch square piece of cake the size of this GoPro? Is that a satisfying amount of cake?
Depends on if you're like a white woman living in Los Angeles that drinks a lot of gin and tonic.
Fair
I was about
enough.
to say, I'm too fat, man. I like food.
I'm the same way, man. I for sure. So for me, I'm looking at like a good sized catfish
I think
sandwich that
they
would be a
consider
serving.
8 ounces or something like that.
And that
Which
maybe so.
I mean,
8 ounces isn't terrible. You know, you go to an 8 ounce an 8 ounce steak is about the size of the palm of my hand here probably. So I mean, that's a decent size.
That still ain't enough.
It's not. I'm not
nah,
going to be
that's like
full.
one fillet, one little fillet.
I'm about to say I'm not going to be full from that, right? But I mean, at least
It's
I
like
could.
just
If you're
enough to make me
starving in the
mad.
woods.
Sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
So do you guys have lake systems up there that you can fish that, let's say aren't connected to all this pollution and the dumping?
There are a few natural lakes up in the mountains, but I would argue that
I have none.
90% of the fishable water in Tennessee and Alabama is connected to the Tennessee River or the Mississippi River. So it's just all together.
Yeah.
As opposed to Michigan,
That's
where
a
I'm from,
shame.
where there's like 100 lakes within an hour drive, and almost all of them aren't connected at all, other than maybe by like one little spring-fed creek that might be a foot wide, right? So, and up there, obviously, there's a whole other thing to think about too. When it comes to pollution, you have plants do filter the water, right? So they're gonna pull out some, right? So these grassier bodies of water, especially if you're catching these fish around these grassier areas, I would think, I could be very wrong here. Again, I'm not a biologist, but I would think that those would be the quote unquote cleaner areas, and that those fish from those spots would probably be a little bit safer if they predominantly stayed in that grassy area. Obviously, if they're just in rocks or just in muck, slack water from the currents feed into the lake, but then it's a slack water area and they're just sitting there all day, probably not going to be as clean. And again, I'm just purely speculative, right? I'm not a biologist. Don't take it as fact. But I would
Oh, I'm
think
taking this back.
I would think that those spots would be safer, cleaner to eat. So all these really clear grassy lakes, I think would be safer to eat from. Like I feel like I would be more inclined to eat something off the north end of Lake Chickamauga versus the southern end of Lake Nickajack, right? Because it goes from being really shallow and grassy and clean to really kind of dingy, dark and rocky, right? A lot less grass. That's just my opinion. Between
You
those
also
two
got to take
spots,
the elevation into account if there's farmlands around, stuff like that, because you get a lot. That's the main problem we have out here in Houston. Not so much farmlands. And when I say Houston, I'm talking, like Houston, 100-mile radius around Houston is just the runoff from everything, neighborhoods, all that. And then, because our elevation and it's all bayous out here, everything that you
I
can
can
fish
actually
with fresh water
I can relate to you on that because I lived in Houston for like 6 months for work.
Right.
And I fished almost every day out there, and you notice the difference between different locations. If there's farms near it or anything like that, it's different clarity and stuff like that on the water.
Yeah, it's real. It's a strange thing because I think all our lakes out here. Well, I know all the three around Houston are man-made, and then it's all just the runoff from everything, and it's just creates a mess. Do you guys ever considered like farming some catfish in like a horse trough in your backyard?
No, I cannot say I have, and I'm pretty sure where I currently live it would be illegal. I can't even have chickens. So, yeah, no, it's not been a thing for me.
I have thought about it, like because I mean, I mess around with aquarium fish a lot, and I've always wanted to do I want to do a pond full of red-tailed catfish and stuff like that. But I'd also thought about doing like blues and flatheads, farm raised.
Well, you and I both know, and it's a whole other topic. Anybody who knows hears anything about the catfishing community, pay lakes are a major discussion point, and that will be a future episode where we do a deep dive into that, and that's a whole other argument. But obviously, the blue cats and the flatheads, they need a certain amount of water per pound of fish.
Yep.
So I'm sure Zach would take that into consideration as well. And then the other issue with red-tailed catfish, obviously they're from South America, not from here. So we would have to hope that he never got it flooded. Otherwise, we'd have a problem down there in Alabama. So it could be
Would it be
interesting.
a bad problem though? That's the whole reason I ain't done it yet, because
I mean, I'm under
I
the
don't know how
impression.
much. I don't know the laws on that.
Sure.
So I've got a red-tailed catfish, but
Well, and you can get them here. I mean, the store here in Chattanooga was selling them a while back. I mean, they only had one or two. But you know, when they grow, they can grow to be, I think it's like 300 pounds. I mean, and like 6 feet long. They can grow to be huge.
the
So
biggest one in captivity is 156 pounds.
Yeah. So I mean, it's
The
just it could be nuts. And their appetite, I'm under the impression, is similar to a flathead's. And the state of, I think it's North Carolina, considers a flathead to be an invasive species. Because they were not originally in North Carolina. So if it's a big enough problem to
They connected
cause
some rivers.
right, and then obviously people like delivering or taking fish they caught in one lake and releasing them in another lake, you know, through a dam lock or whatever, right? All that stuff contributes to problems. And let's just be honest here, when it comes to invasive species spreading, it's not just people, right? Every single waterfowl that walks in one lake and then flies to another lake has the potential to contaminate or spread these species through eggs sticking to their feet, somehow an egg making it through their intestinal tract. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? I mean, there's so much science out there. You can't really just pinpoint it, but it's not a far cry to say that humans are the biggest source of that problem.
No, like they just outlawed here in Alabama. You're no longer allowed to transport gizzard shad.
Really?
I never knew they were invasive.
I wouldn't have considered them
They're
invasive
considered.
either. I did not know that. And the fact you
They're
can't
considered invasive now.
can you not transport them between lakes, or you can't transport them live, or you just can't what? I mean,
You can't transport them live or in between lakes.
Huh? That's crazy. I mean, good for them. You know, if it's a problem, I hope it works out for them the way they want to, right? And that, you know, we are. I know Zach, Sam, and I are. I'm assuming Joe is too. We're big on the conservation efforts that make sense. We're 100% behind, right? There are some that confuse me, but I mean, if there's people out there that make more money than I do, that make up these ideas and rules and show the science and everything. So yeah, it's just a matter of
you never know.
wading through that, right? Yeah. So, for 90% of the time, though, I'm going to be on the conservation officer side or conservation agency side when it comes to these things. But yeah. Well, we're at the halfway point. If you guys are just now joining, we've been talking to Joe and Zach. We were talking to Sam for a little bit too. He had to go. He's not feeling well. We've been talking about fish consumption and the truth about toxins. Talking about one of the biggest, or the biggest, I should say, industrial spillage in the United States into a waterway, which was the Kingston power plant in Tennessee, spilling 1.1 million U.S. gallons of coal sludge into the river, including that whole entire system, which is causing these signs to go up that say, hey, be careful about eating fish out of this river, particularly the catfish. We've gone into what pollutants there are in fish in general. The biggest two being in for the catfish in the Kingston scenario being PCBs and triglycerides. Those seem to be the two biggest that get talked about. Simply because that coal sludge has lead and chromium and cadmium and a bunch of other funky stuff you don't want in your body there. We've also talked about how through bioaccumulation, that's where all these like big species like tuna and whatnot in saltwater, either through their age or through the amount of food they eat, depending on their metabolism, polluting their meat that you have to worry about and think about, right? But let's take a moment before we keep going in this, and let's say hi to some people that showed up in the stream. CW Franzilla, welcome in. Little Leaf, welcome in. Lisa Burrito Catfishing Lady, welcome in. Anthony J all day. Glad you got to stop by for a minute. Hope you're doing fantastic. Appreciate you guys coming in and saying hello. For everybody else out there just lurking around, we appreciate you coming here and tuning in and checking us out. But cleaning a fish. Joe, I'm gonna let you touch on this more than I can because I know you've done more of it than I have, and again with the saltwater perspective, dealing with the bigger fish, seeing the techniques and tactics that they go through and talk about there. What can somebody do to try to avoid some of these pollutants while they're eating these fish?
Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do. I would say the 2 or 3 things. First is going to be avoid eating the skin because the skin will generally have a higher concentration of toxins. And then sometimes they'll refer to it as fat. Saltwater fish, we refer to it as the bloodline, but it's just going to be the darker part of the meat. And most people cut that out anyways because it doesn't taste good. Usually tastes pretty fishy, but you don't want to eat that. The belly fat is another thing. I know some people like to eat the belly fat on certain fish, but that's also going to be a high concentration area. And then I think the last one's probably going to be roe, eating the eggs and whatnot, which that's an acquired thing, but some people like to do that. But as far as cleaning them, that's really all you can do. Cooking them, you can cook them in ways where it doesn't keep the juices inside. Let's say if you grill them or you boil them and you drain them, and then that's supposed to eliminate a lot of the toxins that way as well. So,
Okay.
So all you guys who are deep frying this crappie, I know they're delicious.
I know.
Yeah,
I don't know
also
if it's
hear
because
about
of the
fishing
toxins
itself.
in the water, but I know the belly meat off of gar is toxic enough to make you really sick.
Really? I wonder if it's got some kind of like huh.
Well, I'm sure with them it's more
'Cause
of
I know that's a delicious fish.
I'm about to say
cook
that
it,
for
right?
them.
Their eggs are very, very toxic too.
I mean, it makes sense, right? So, because the eggs are formed from the. Let me rephrase this. Hang on. Let me make sure I word this correctly. Your body, as a fish, breaks down fat for energy, right? Well, that energy is put into the effort of making eggs. If you're not getting rid of that material, it would make sense that it goes to the eggs as well, especially with that being fatty tissue and being in close proximity to every other area of your fatty tissue on the fish's body. I mean, it makes sense to me. I mean, is that actually how it works? Again, I'm not a biologist, but that would make sense to me.
And well, that's how the chemicals are stored, is in the fatty tissues. That's where they bind, is in the fatty tissues. So
right,
that makes perfect sense.
Right, the egg itself starts off as fatty tissue, right, and then eventually builds into whatever else. But yeah,
it goes from fatty tissue to follicles to egg.
Right, exactly. See, I knew somebody knew this. I didn't know this. Okay, I don't know all the technical mumbo jumbo with this, right? But long story
I know
short,
it because I've bred reptiles.
Sure.
You look for follicles on snakes, which is pre-egg pretty much, before it's been shelled and everything like that. An egg is called a follicle before it gets its outer shelling and all that stuff.
I got you. Well, obviously, fish eggs don't have a hard outer shell, but they still do have a shell membrane, so I'm sure the concept's very similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like Joe said, for me, even with the bigger catfish, if you're cutting off that mud line or that darker meat, you're going to anyway. Whether it be white bass are really bad about it, right? The dark meat on white bass, striped bass, all that good stuff. If you leave that on there, that is going to be one of the most fishiest tasting piece of meat you ever have in your life. It is absolutely gross.
But if you take that off, that's one of the best tasting fish in your life.
Exactly, it's like a complete 180 turn. Exactly, and there's other areas of fish too. Like I know walleye is another good example here. So walleye is a predatory fish. They do have some fatty tissue on them as well. They don't have a mud vein that's anywhere near as bad, especially since the way their fillets are. Their spine or their they have a set of Y bones that go straight down the side of the fillet. So you actually every one fillet of a walleye, when you clean it properly, gives you 2 fillets because you literally zipper it off the bones and off of that fatty tissue right there on the lateral line. But another popular area of eating off of a walleye is the wing. They call it walleye wings. Is like the dorsal fin area, the bottom where the belly meat is. Again, that's a fattier area. Really good. I'm not gonna say they're not. They're very delicious. You fry them up. You eat them fins and all. It's like potato chips. It's pretty crazy. But then walleye cheeks are another one, right? That cheek muscle is going to be kind of fatty too, but and those are always good. Some fish are just better than others in taste, period, whether it be fatty tissue or not. But at the same time, not thinking about it, you're exposing yourself to these toxins more in these polluted waterways where these fish are caught. So just things to consider. Like Joe said, some of the ways you cook it. Obviously, if you're boiling it, steaming it, grilling it, it's able to break down the tissue and pull it away from the meat. Then that's going to be a healthier option and have less of those to deal with. Whereas deep frying it, which don't get me wrong, I love deep fried fish. It's just kind of going to keep it in there. You know, you put an outer shell on it, you cook that outer shell, and literally you're just boiling everything inside this shell of breading, right? So just something to keep in mind that it may not be the best way to go without doing some proper cleaning beforehand. And like I said, like Joe said, rather, lateral line, belly meat, bloodline, as they call it, mud vein, depending on which person you talk to. A lot of people here in Tennessee call on a catfish as the mud vein. And it's because it's literally got, they call it the mud vein because it's literally got the mud of the river, they call it, in that blood vein. And so they want it gone because it tastes bad. But yeah, it's just something to consider and think about. That's for sure. You guys got anything else to add on to this before I just keep talking, rattling everybody's ears off?
Don't eat farm raised fish.
I have never been a fan of farm raised fish to start with. I know.
Yeah, they're not.
Well, so if you think about the
Well,
way
they have about 5 to 10 times the toxins of wild fish.
I believe that, and anybody, again, some of the rumors talk about, like you said, you kind of been lied to your whole life about fish being the healthiest, right? Because most people aren't going to buy wild caught. It costs 50% more, right? You're probably gonna be buying farm raised, especially if you're buying it in bulk. You're gonna get these big bags at Walmart that are on sale of tilapia, of trout. That's probably the biggest two, right? Because obviously, if you're getting salmon, there is farm raised salmon too, but a lot of it's mostly wild caught salmon, right? Tuna is gonna be wild caught. Cod is gonna be wild caught. You can't raise those in the farms, but the tilapia, and the catfish, those are probably the two biggest ones that are farmed. I think trout's farmed pretty high too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But so those three or four species, tilapia, trout, catfish. What was it? I said the fourth one a second ago. But either way, those four species are pretty much going to be the ones that you're going to see the most farm raised.
You said salmon earlier.
I think salmon's mostly wild caught. I don't know if there's any farm raised salmon. I don't know if they actually are 100%.
No, that's heavily farmed. What they do is they actually farm the salmon in the oceans, especially up in Norway, and they try to promote that as a healthier option. But when you consider it, it's all the same thing because the fish are in such a high concentration that the issue is going to be the waste that's created is taxing their immune systems, and in turn they have to add chemicals to keep the fish healthy and then increase the growth rates. And then also the feed that they feed them has forget the toxin that's in it, but it's like a pesticide preservative they use in the feeds. So the salmon is actually an interesting one because that will be promoted as healthy, but it's one of the worst ones you can eat.
Well, I know tilapia is really bad because they raise them in the same pond. Well, them and catfish both are raised in the same ponds as trout or any other species that they do in a farm, because they literally, you have a top layer fish that prefers top of the water column, and then you have a fish that prefers the bottom layer of the water column, right? And like you said, it's just a constant cycle of, chemical stuff on top, waste going to the bottom, and then it's just a constant cycle of back and forth. So yeah, farm raised is definitely
and with the tilapia farming, they use banned chemicals in that still in a lot of the, Asian countries. They'll use the banned chemicals still, so you never know what you're getting. And then another thing about tilapia that's interesting is that fish has an amino acid profile that's actually not good for you to eat. It'll kind of throw your balance off.
I did not know
throw that in there.
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, it's got too much omega-6 and not enough 3, I want to say.
I got you.
Don't quote me.
It's fact. You heard it here, folks. Joe said tilapia is bad for you. Don't eat it. I don't care how good it tastes. Don't do it.
Yeah, I recall watching a documentary one time about how those guys farm them, and it's pretty astounding. It's
Well, tilapia breed
it's
in
not.
any water condition.
Oh
Well, that should
yeah,
tell you
Very
something.
hard
yeah,
to
they're
fish.
illegal here. If you catch one in Texas, my buddy was telling me that it's illegal to let it go.
Well, that's like Asian carp
Because you
here, the
have to
same
kill
way.
it.
Yeah, if you catch one, you have to kill it here
Yeah,
too.
this.
It's
Okay.
actually funny. It's future episode stuff. We're going to talk about invasive species at some point too, because there actually is a documentary that was done by, it was a third party, but they were talking directly to some officers in Virginia about snakeheads, about how it's not actually as bad
Yeah.
now as they thought it would be, because long story short, the local fish populations actually were starting to identify snakehead as a food source, and so they were noticing some positive changes in that for that ecosystem. So that's pretty cool. That's gonna be another episode entirely, but just something to look forward to.
I just
for
want
you
to
guys.
know when we get our timers.
Yeah, that would be fun to catch,
I wanna catch-
and it would be nice to not have to go a million
I wanna
miles away to
catch
get
one
one.
so bad.
It's a bucket list species for sure. Well, it's like those. What was it?
Such a powerful fish, man.
Well, it's like the ghost clown knife fish. I think is one of the bigger ones in Florida right now. They're kind of rare, but
Yeah, I
they
used
get to be really
keep
big.
those as pets too.
Yeah, there's a
They get
lot.
Yeah,
Of,
few
I've
pounds,
had
yeah.
ghost knives.
long
I've had
story.
ghost knife fish.
They're cool.
Long story short, the aquarium community is completely screwed the ecosystem of Florida. Thanks, guys. Just
Hey,
kidding.
hey, not all of us.
Hey, I like aquariums too. I can't say anything. It happens. I mean, obviously the ones that were releasing their fish into their waterways because they didn't want to deal with them anymore, shame on you. But obviously things do happen. If you have a house that floods or hurricane comes through and wipes it out and busts your tank and tosses it in the river, I can't blame you for that one. But if you're out there dumping them on
I'm going to
purpose,
go
you guys
pick
are
up
jerks.
a 14-inch pacu tomorrow.
Nice. But
Okay, yeah.
Dude was talking about putting it in his pond, and I was like, dude, you're going to get in trouble for that. Let me
No
just go
kidding.
get it.
no kidding. Joe, you were talking earlier about on the fish eating like mackerel and some other stuff. Why is it that mackerel is so high in mercury to start with? Do you have any idea?
Now, I don't know that this is for sure the reason. I know it's a fish that has a high oil concentration in it. But to be honest with you, also, I think it has to do with the growth rate, because my uncle's like a real old time fisherman. When he was young in South Florida, he used to do a lot of kingfish tournaments. And we were out there last season and we had a big kingfish on, and he was estimating that fish was about 60 years old. So now that was a bigger fish, but when you think about it, that's not a fast growing fish. I would say it was probably around 60 or 70 pounds, and it was that old. So I think with the mackerel, it's because of the growth rate. And then another thing that I'll add, I don't know if you guys have access to it where you are, but now you can get it in the grocery stores a lot, as the mahi, or they'll call it dolphin or dorado.
Oh yeah.
But
That's a
good fish. Yeah. For when it comes to staying away from toxins, because those can grow almost 3 inches per year. So to cut a long story short, in the first year of that fish's life, it can grow up to 40 pounds and 4 feet long. So they just grow so fast, they don't really accumulate concentration. So I would say with the mackerel, it's the slower growth rate. And they're, voracious eaters, but they all are.
Sure. And like I said,
love those.
yeah, I love mahi myself. I'm a big fan for sure, and it's delicious.
One of my favorite saltwater.
But yeah, that meat's always white. But I've had swordfish, I've had tuna, and I've had some funky tasting tuna, and I've had some funky tasting swordfish. So, maybe it was the mercury. I don't know. Shark. But I'm not gonna. Whatever. Right? I don't know 100% the difference. I can't say I've had shark identified as shark, so I don't know for sure. Obviously, you never know.
Shark is some good meat.
Well, I know shark takes a lot more to prepare, because you have to like purify the skin or something first, or flush it with water for so long or something first.
Gut that sucker when you catch them, gut them and take everything, all the guts out. Otherwise, what happens is when they get stressed out after they're out of the water, they release the ammonia. I want to say it is.
Okay.
Yeah, and you pretty much have to, if you're going to keep it and it's in limit, you have to clean it right there.
I got you.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't. That's what's interesting too. I don't want to say a lot, but you'll see people here and there. And I always think to myself, how the hell did you eat that?
I clean mine immediately. Like if I catch one and it's in slot limit and I know I want to keep one, it gets cleaned right there.
I know.
I'll dress it out and put it and pack it with ice.
I know one guy I talked to. He would put it in a cooler and he would. I think he said he flushed it in fresh water for like a week or something before he actually cleaned it. I mean, it was a week. It was like 48 hours. I don't know. But he did something with just clean water and ice, keep it cold, obviously, while he did it. But something like that. But
and the weird thing about shark is it doesn't have a fish texture.
It's like pork.
It's not. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't. It does not have a fish texture to it.
Well, then I can say for sure like the swordfish was a shark.
Pork you've ever had.
I would say the swordfish I had was definitely swordfish then, and not shark, because it was definitely not a pork chop.
Well, if they cook it like swordfish back before it was regulated in restaurants, I want to say in like the late 60s, they say that about 80% of what they served as swordfish and tuna was just shark. Because the thing about shark is you can cook it all kinds of different ways.
Okay. That's pretty nuts.
Yeah. We need to start harvesting.
Some fried shark nuggets is pretty good. Yeah. I digress. I can keep going about it. I love the shark fishing part. I love all that. I love to eat it. I can keep going on it.
Sure. But yeah, it's
although when I was in Texas, I never caught a shark though.
Sounds to me like you were slacking.
Well, you might have just been here when the run wasn't on. That might have been what it was. Depends on what time of year you were here.
It was a hurricane. I did natural disaster. So it was right after a hurricane and flooded everything in Houston. They shipped me out to Corpus Christi after a month of being in Houston, and I fished out in Corpus Christi and Houston.
And a lot of times just those weather systems will those weather systems will mess everything up.
YouTube, I'm sorry. He didn't mean it. He didn't mean it.
We're far enough into the show, it doesn't count now.
Well, you know what I mean, though. Things happen. But yeah, I don't know. I try to be careful what I eat. That's what it boils down to. I know
that's also a highly polluted fish, the shark. Since we're on the subject of toxins, that's one of the top 5, I think, maybe even top 3.
But it's got a higher fat content, right? That's part of it. And then obviously their whole diet is just fish.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it also has to do with the size of sharks. Generally, I'm not speaking for everybody, but generally sharks are going to be over like 2 or 3 feet if you take them to eat them, depending on the species and how big they can be.
Right.
So I think that has to do with it all as well.
Sure. But like I said, I try to be careful what I eat. I eat catfish here out the Tennessee River, and I don't have a third arm yet. I don't have any unnatural growths, per se. I have lost my hair. I don't know if it has maybe it has something to do with it. Maybe my hair loss is sparked by it. I don't know. But the biggest thing, if you are keeping aware of what you're doing, what you're eating, how these fish grow and whatnot, take that all into consideration. Consider these toxins. The fact that they don't, there's some knowledge about there and some information about the long-term effects of exposure. There's still stuff they're figuring out. Let's just be honest here. They don't have all the answers. So keep that in mind. When it comes to cleaning techniques, consider taking out the mud vein. Consider avoiding the fattier tissue. Maybe don't eat the eggs. If it's something you worry about. I know people here also in Tennessee that have had catfish almost every day because they go fishing every day, and they've ate it for 50 years, and they're in better shape than I am now. So I mean, there's just like anything else, every person deals with everything differently. So keep this. This is more
So you're
of
saying
a
it's affected the entirety of Tennessee,
probably
and now you can't tell the difference.
maybe that's what it is. Maybe, who knows? But as long as you guys take it into consideration, consider your options. Obviously, we're all condoning true wild caught over farm raised, simply because of the stuff that they don't measure, they don't regulate. Of the stuff they do show and regulate, or sorry, what they do show, what they have tested, I should say, wild caught does appear to be better. Between that kind of practice, wild caught versus farming, between the way you clean it, just simply keeping in mind about how these fish grow, and some basic, I would argue, common sense stuff based on simple facts. Uh, that's the way I would treat it, the way I would look at it. There's going to be a certain amount of interpretation, obviously, you have to do for yourself. But long story short, it can be easily managed, easily maintained, by thinking about it. So, with that being said, um, Joe, thanks again for coming in tonight, last minute, helping out with
Thank
this.
you.
Shout out again to Sam. Hope you get to feeling better, buddy. Zach, thank you for being here. Do either of you have anything else to add to this? If not,
I
it's
guess
fine.
maybe just eat smaller fish, bluegills, crappie, stuff like that.
Fish that grow full grown in one season.
There you go.
Stuff that, yeah. All right, well, guys, this has been the Bait Tank. My name's Anthony. Joined, like I said, with Zach, Sam, as usual, and then our guest Joe today. Thank you again to everybody for being here. I do not know for sure what the next episode is going to be. We'll announce it this Friday. But we do have some stuff in the pipeline for some pretty good episodes, including Pay Lakes, the problems of Pay Lakes, breaking down some whether or not electronics are affecting the tournament scene. I know another one we're talking about doing was maybe the mortality rate of fish that are in tournaments and get released, which is a very surprising number on that one. I think that's gonna be a good episode. There's tons of stuff coming down the pipeline. If you guys haven't followed us already, we are currently streaming to Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We're working on getting the TikTok following, so you can do TikTok as well. If you're on any of those platforms, you're enjoying what we're doing, please hit follow and like and all that good stuff. But until next time, this is the Bait Tank, and we will see you guys on the next one in about 2 weeks. So y'all have a good night, tight lines. Make sure you catch some fish today, and take it easy.